Test. No?
I'm going to go back.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're going to get started in about 5 minutes, so if you could make your way to a seat and get ready, we'll be with you shortly.
Yeah, no, it's good. I had to move mine over because I couldn't. Yeah, I like it better over here. Thank you for coming, John. Appreciate it.
Shameless. No doubt.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Stephanie Rutledge, and I am the chair of the Clinical Mental Health Counseling Department at Emory and Henry College. I want to thank you for joining us this evening for an important discussion about addiction in Southwest Virginia. This event is being co-sponsored by the Department of Clinical Mental Health Counseling and the School of Nursing. We want to say a special thank you to Deans Lou Fincher and Lorianne Ferguson for their support of our programs and this event. It is our plan that this event will be the first of many opportunities for continuing education and engagement with the community. We appreciate our esteemed panelists and thank them for giving their time this evening to talk about this important topic. I'd also like to introduce Professor Matt Terrell, who's here on the stage. He is the program director for our newly launched, just this fall, master's degree in addiction counseling. And he will be moderating the discussion this evening. He'll be making the introductions to our panel members in a few minutes. There will be a Q&A portion at the end of the discussion. You can write your questions on the index cards that you received on the way in. If you would like, you can also speak into the mic and ask your questions. So I'm going to turn the program over to Professor Terrell at this moment. Thank you for attending, both in person and those watching on live stream. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Dr. Rutledge.
And I'd like to ask if we could please give a warm welcome round of applause to our panelists here today. It's my honor to moderate this discussion on such an important topic, and it's my privilege to introduce you all to this esteemed panel. Going from your left to right, we have Mr. Rick Mitchell. Mr. Rick Mitchell has been practicing as either a substance abuse counselor, treatment practitioner, or certified substance abuse counselor since 1995, and as a licensed professional counselor since 2003. He has supervised current LPCs in several states. Throughout his 30-plus years in human service fields, Rick has served as a therapist, supervisor, consultant, evaluator, advocate, and educator in many settings. Throughout his career, he has been developing, implementing, overseeing, and sustaining evidence-based programs that meet unmet or undermet needs across service continuums. He has performed and overseen these duties across state lines and currently participates in national quality assurance initiatives. He has consulted with organizational leaders and helped develop programs across several states. Rick currently serves as the Director of Lifestyle Recovery Programs for Fairview Housing. Next, we have Mr. John Graham. As an attorney and a United Methodist pastor, John was first elected clerk of the Circuit Court of Smith County in 2010. John has joined forces with other community members to start the Appalachian Center for Hope, which exists to provide and coordinate services to restore hope for families, people, and communities experiencing the devastating impact of substance abuse. John chairs the board of directors for the Appalachian Center for Hope and has been a public servant for this area for many decades. Next, we have Dr. Amanda Matuszek. Dr. Matuszek is a professor of psychology at Bluefield State University in Bluefield, West Virginia. She earned a BS in psychology from Bridgewater College and an MS in psychology and PhD in behavioral neuroscience from Binghamton University. Her research focuses on the neurobiology of alcohol and drug use in adolescence. Specifically, she examines how adolescent substance use permanently alters neural development and behaviors. Through her research, Dr. Matuszek aims to improve the understanding of addiction and inform prevention and treatment efforts. She is deeply committed to educating students and the broader community about the science of adolescent brain development and substance use. Next, we have Chief John Patrick Clare. Chief John Patrick Clare began his law enforcement career in 1999 as a U.S. Army military police officer. Since entering municipal law enforcement in 2007, he has been employed by the town of Dumfries, Virginia Police Department, Prince William County, Virginia Police Department, and in 2013 was appointed the Chief of Police of the town of Quantico, Virginia Police Department. In 2018, Chief Clare was appointed the Chief of Police of the town of Marion, Virginia Police Department, where he leads 21 sworn members in a jurisdiction of approximately 4.2 square miles. Chief Clare is a regular columnist and essayist with local and regional print media, and in 2022, his writing was featured in the symposium work, Breaking Ground, Charting Our Future in a Pandemic Year, alongside other public intellectuals from the faith and political communities. We are pleased to have these panelists with us tonight, and very happy to say that all of the panelists serve on the advisory board for the Clinical Mental Health Counseling program at Emory and Henry College. So we're going to get right into the conversation, and I'd like to lay the groundwork for our ensuing discussion tonight by asking each of you to just describe for our audience the problem of addiction in Southwest Virginia as you see it. So how would you describe the addiction problem to those who are less familiar with it? For example, in your various roles, how do you see the addiction problem affecting our community? And I'd like to ask just to go from left to right, starting with Rick.
Certainly. Thank you, Matt. Can you all hear me? Hello? I can really see it. Project. All right. Is that working? Better? Okay. How's that? All right. Very good. So 30 plus years in the field, you know, when I came into the field in early 1993, I mean, there was addiction. I mean, there was a lot of alcohol abuse. There was some opioid addiction. You know, there was a lot of you know, various minor instances of addiction all around, but nothing like what ensued over the course of the following 10 years. And so, you know, what's happened over the past 20, 25 years in our home, I'm a lifetime Southwest Virginia resident, what's happened here over the course of the past 2.5 decades is it's astounding, it's difficult, and it's sad. It affects people younger ages, and opioid addiction has ravished our area, and that has progressed into a multitude of other widespread addictions as well, from methamphetamine addiction, now, you know, fentanyl, and lots of, you know, trying to do awareness because of fentanyl overdoses, and then and even, you know, further things beyond that at this point. So that's just a really quick answer.
Perfect.
Yeah. So thank you for the opportunity to be here. First of all, cherish the opportunity to talk tonight. You know, I think the answer to your question is best illustrated with something that took place at the Fentanyl Awareness Day. Michelle Ward is the director of our recovery court in Smith County, and she and some others set up a table and had the branches of a tree. And they also had some paint that you could put your thumbprint in, and the invitation was to any of the students who were walking through. So this was middle and high school students, if I'm not mistaken, from all over the county. And we're asked this question: if substance abuse touches your life, feel free to make a thumbprint and fill up this tree. And Michelle brought that picture, and I probably should have asked to borrow it to bring it here tonight. And it's full. It's a tree that's full of fingerprints from our youngsters who have seen substance abuse affect their lives. And I think that's what substance abuse looks like. Some people may not see it, but it is pervasive, and touches everyone.
Thank you.
And I'd like to kind of pick up where you left off. Substance abuse, especially in Southern Virginia, I have to remind myself to say Southwestern Virginia. Usually I say Southern West Virginia, so trying to make sure I remember where I am tonight. But we tend to see that substance abuse touches nearly everyone. Just about everyone knows someone with a substance use disorder, may have a family member, or, you know, just somehow has been affected. And we see that a lot in the social services that are available. I know in Southwest Virginia, a lot of the foster care systems are overrun because parents with substance use disorders are not able to properly care for their children. And so it becomes a generational problem then. You see it affecting, you know, this generation and then the next. And so while a lot of this has been a much more recent phenomenon, I think unfortunately we're going to see it affecting us for generations to come, simply because of how widely it touches people.
Thank you.
I feel like all of their answers were really good. And so now I've got to try to do it. But so being in law enforcement, obviously substance abuse manifests itself to me as kind of tears in the social fabric. So we see child abuse, we see physical abuse, violence, emotional abuse. We see overdose deaths, and to kind of illustrate that, one of the things that always happens when there's an overdose is people usually select a picture for funeral services. And think about the times where you typically have your best picture made. It's like your high school graduation, your wedding. So we usually get to see that high school graduation photo. And it's someone full of hope, full of energy, with their whole life in front of them, that's now seen all of that evaporate. And so, you know, as a chief of police of Marion, when I think about my responsibility to the community, I think about everyone who lives here. And so when I see those futures kind of evaporate, that's what it looks like.
Thank you all for laying giving us a backdrop of what it looks like. There's some really profound ideas and concept that you shared. I have a few questions about what this looks like now. Starting with you, Rick. How does having an addictions treatment program that produces therapists who treat substance use disorders in Southwest Virginia help our communities?
Oh, it's groundbreaking, and so what we've seen over the previous few decades here is this destruction of our home, our world, our communities, without necessary tools to combat the issues. And so having a program like that of Emory and Henry branching out into the addictions arena is standing in the gap of a huge issue. And so graduate programs in counseling specifically have been fairly rampant in Southwest Virginia for the past 15 plus or minus years. You know, prior to that, there was even a wider gap. But the last 15 years or so, some programs have gotten up and running, and you know, those programs initially may not have even included a course in substance use, misuse, whatever. There may have been only a small component in those programs about what that looks like in a broader spectrum. And so nationally, a few programs have started to pop up here and there. Within the past several months to a year, Emory and Henry decided to branch out into that addictions specific space. And so what we've experienced, and by we, I manage a couple residential programs, and it's nice to see some friendly faces in the audience. And so in these residential programs to help treat people with substance use disorder, beyond just a typical detox type environment, we've begun to get a lot of students coming into, you know, our residential programs to learn about this. And so they've, you know, most people have been affected by it personally in some way, whether it be you know, family member, a close friend, you know, whoever, you know, just people that are cared about, if not the individual themselves. And so people are passionate about the topic. I won't ask for a raise of hands, but if I did, similar to John's comment, I doubt that there's anybody here who hasn't been affected in some way, whether that be themselves or a family member or someone close by. And so it is, I would like to say we are. I hope we are getting beyond a stigma of judgment and you know, all these negative labels and all of that sort of thing. So having a program developed in Southwest Virginia, in this community, with the availability of people to participate in that from a distance, like, you know, let's be honest, you know, as a lifetime Southwest Virginia resident, you know, there's a lot of distance between Bluefield and, you know, Cumberland Gap, or Galax and Pounds, or, you know, whatever, and or, you know, Grundy or Hurley, you know, and so on and so forth. So, you know, it's a really broad geographic area, even though there's a focus on Southwest Virginia. I mean, that's, you know, I managed an organization at one point in time that covered 4 counties. From the furthest end of one of those 4 counties to the furthest end of the others, a 3.5-hour drive. And so, you know, we're really geographically unique. I did I may be going off script just a little bit here, but a fun little Saturday morning project that I took on a few years ago was, I'm wondering, from Cumberland Gap, how far is it to the other side, to the furthest point in Virginia, and how far is it to some other locations? And so I did this little research project, and from Cumberland Gap in Virginia, that's 3 states, right? So in the furthest corner in Virginia to the other corner at Assateague Island, Chincoteague, it's closer, folks, to get to places like Davenport, Iowa, New Orleans, about half of the state of Florida, all of North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, West Virginia, various locations, Georgia. And then it is closer to get to Toronto than it is to the other side of the state of Virginia from Cumberland Gap. And so just to give a little bit of a geographic, broadening of a mindset, to have the availability of a program that's talking about addiction and doing that in a trauma-informed way, in a caring way, in a loving way, is also available through broadening, broadband access and other means for people to actually get that education at different places, and yet still be able to do that in Southwest Virginia. So what does that mean? It means standing in the gap of a serious problem without the resources to be able to do it. So a program like this does nothing but help train people and train professionals in a way that a real difference can be made for the long term, for generations, to help make a drastic change in the issue.
Thank you, Rick. That is our hope at Emory and Henry, to be a beacon for the community and produce therapists that will be part of the solution. And thank you to Rick, who is a supervisor for many of our students at some of his treatment facilities, Bristol Lifestyle Recovery, Mended Women. We thank you. Would anyone of the other panelists like to comment about that? The importance of producing more therapists for this area. That's okay, because Rick, you mentioned trauma-informed care. Can you talk a little bit about what that means and why it's important for helping people who enter treatment and remain in recovery? Trauma-informed care is very important to addiction recovery.
Is that better? Okay. All right. Better? Okay. Sorry, guys. So trauma-informed care, I get asked occasionally, is that just the most recent buzz term in the field? And I give a very quick, no, it isn't. I give a very quick, this is a way of providing care. This is not a treatment modality. This is not, a hot off the presses theory. This is basically what trauma-informed care means is that 98+% of the people who walk through the door of any behavioral health practitioner, and again, that involves most of us, okay? And so 49 out of 50 people plus who seek care have a trauma background, have been hurt in pretty significant ways. And so what do we do when someone comes in, comes to our need? If you're a parent, I'm a grandparent, my grandbaby just turned 2. And so, but if one of our kids comes to us and they're hurt, what do? We pick them up, we hug them, we kiss their elbow, we love on them, we provide care, we provide a safe environment, we nurture. And that hasn't typically been the case for people seeking treatment and help for a substance use disorder. There's been, well, you chose that, or that's your fault, or, and so trauma-informed care is removing the judgment. Trauma-informed care is connecting in a way where people are comfortable and safe to reveal and disclose anything that they need to reveal and discuss to help them get better without the fear of judgment. It's more of a, instead of what's wrong with you, what happened to you, or what happened with you, or help explain that and use that as a connecting tool. And there are many, many layers and levels to what trauma-informed really, truly means. Centers of Disease Control did, wonderful study and follow-up studies, and there have been many, many studies done since. But I would encourage any of you to look up that term or to research that, because any organization worth its salt operates from a trauma-informed care approach instead of a judgmental approach.
Thank you, Rick. And Dr. Matuszek, with your experience and expertise in neuroscience, I wonder if you might have anything to add about trauma, what it may do to the brain, or how it's experienced by folks, or maybe even, particularly related to addiction.
Absolutely. Trauma is a huge factor when it comes to addictions. We know that trauma causes long-lasting brain changes that can make someone more likely to develop an addiction issue. We also know that if they're not getting help, if they're not getting some counseling to deal with the trauma that they've experienced, it's just going to perpetuate and continue to kind of feed that substance use disorder. And so you're absolutely right, Rick. A holistic approach is really necessary, especially if you're dealing with someone that maybe is housing insecure, food insecure, and then you just say, okay, well, stop using drugs. Well, they have this laundry list of stressors, and one of the easiest ways to, kind of drown your stress away is to seek out a substance. And that tends to be part of what, continues these disorders in people. And so in order to address the substance use, you have to address the other stressors in life as well. The housing, the financial situation, a lot of, again, I mentioned, foster care earlier. If someone has lost their children into the system, helping them navigate some of that, getting a roof over their head, getting them food is going to go a long way in terms of also helping the substance use disorder. You can't really separate one from the other. And stress is a main factor when it comes to substance use. So that has to be part of the treatment approach.
Doctor, do you think it's possible that trauma opens up some kind of pathway in the brain, and then even when the trauma's over, that the pathway's there and it's kind of something has to fill it, something like that?
In a sense, yeah. That trauma, it makes us more vulnerable, and substance use is one of the things that can kind of address that vulnerability a little bit. And not in a good way. It really just covers it up, and then once the substance is out of your system, that trauma comes back. Essentially, by
Right.
seeking substance use as a self-treatment method, you're almost re-traumatizing yourself over and over. So, yeah, absolutely.
So down here before we got started, we were talking about, you're the neuroscientist, I'm the police officer, but what we were talking about is how we've gotten so good at hacking the human brain, whether it's through social media or through chemical processes or whatever it is. We're getting so good at unlocking it, and now we've kind of got the door wide open, and maybe we're getting a little more than we bargained for. And so now that those pathways are open, they end up with all kinds of unconsidered consequences. And so when we start solving the addiction issue, those other things don't go away, right? Like those things stay. And so there's got to be solutions that surround all the kind of a whole ecosystem of solutions. Otherwise, you're just taking something out, it's just going to get replaced by something else. But I think it's fascinating to kind of think about what you said is when you're engaged in the use of certain substances that you're re-traumatizing, so you're keeping the pathway fresh,
Yeah.
and it's not even get a chance to heal up.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you brought that up, and Matt, I'm going to jump ahead to one of my questions, actually.
Sure, and we had some comments from John Graham when you're done with that as well.
Oh, sure.
Mm-hmm.
So my research focused a lot on the adolescent time period of human development and how substance use during that age range affects people later on in life. And one of the things that we know is your frontal lobe is the last part of your brain to develop to its full adult potential. And we tend to think, okay, by 18 it's developed. Not really. Most research shows that it's about 24 or 25 years old before your frontal lobe is at its full developmental stage. And that's important because your frontal lobe is what handles your judgment, decision-making, emotional control, risk-taking behaviors, all things that are associated with drug use. And one thing that we found is that by using drugs during that developmental time period, you're actually putting your frontal lobe in a state of arrested development. You're kind of stopping that development, so you're going to be perpetually an adolescent. And so a lot of times we do, a lot of substance abuse starts in teenage years. And so now it's creating this kind of almost disease state where the brain is now set in a pattern where it's impulsive. It wants to go out and take risks. It wants to seek more drug. And at the same time, the drugs are kind of hacking the system and making it so that it's harder to get as much pleasure from normal everyday things. Because the drugs have overloaded our reward system so much, that's the only thing that really brings joy and happiness. And so again, that's, part of that whole developmental picture that it just has such a huge impact on, treatment and kind of where we go from here, which, makes kind of not even treatment, but just preventing it in the first place absolutely critical. Obviously, we have such an issue that we do have to deal with the treatment part, but if we can just stop it before it ever begins, that's going to be a huge contributor.
In light of what you've said, I'm particularly proud of the Smith County school system, which has prioritized trauma-informed care in the school system. I don't know if there are anybody here from the school system in the audience, but Dennis Carter, Dr. Dennis Carter, the school superintendent, has really made it a priority for all educators to be trained in trauma-informed care, and then all the aides, and then all the cafeteria workers, and then all the bus drivers, and then the custodial staff, and then after they've been through the training, they go through the training again. And that type of emphasis it speaks to the importance of treating people while they're young with what happened to you. I really like the way that Dr. Carter phrased to me the purpose of the school system. And once upon a time, you might have said, well, it's just to educate the students. But Dr. Carter said to me that it's to remove all barriers to education. And that's a pretty big goal. I mean, that's a gargantuan task. But that's the stated goal of our Smith County school system.
And I think it's so valuable how you're all bringing to the conversation what this looks like in real life. Chief Clare, in your introduction, you mentioned how addiction manifests in many ways with abuse and neglect and violence and things like that. I'm going to go back to some of the comments that Rick was talking a little bit, you alluded to before about with trauma-informed care. It's so important to recognize the person and embrace the person. We think about attachment theory and how there's so much disconnection, amongst people who are using or who may be addicted, right? So can you talk a little bit about the treatment approach versus the punishment philosophy? In society, we often have, many people feel like substance use and addiction may be, a choice, or, we tend to have that judgmental, point in the way that it looks on the ground. The way people experience it in their families and communities can be very, very difficult. So how do you maintain a treatment approach versus a punishment approach?
Certainly. Yeah, and thank you for the question. Historically, it's a criminal activity. It's you punish that criminal activity. You have accountability of that criminal activity, and we're not saying people should just go commit a bunch of crimes and that sort of thing. What we do know is that the criminal behavior is a symptom of the disease model, and so the disease meaning substance use disorder, has been classified, whether it be addiction or some other name, has been classified as a disease since 1953. Most of us were not born in 1953. A few maybe, but most of us in this room probably were not. And so it's been around our entire lives. The International Classification of Diseases has acknowledged this. AMA has acknowledged this for 70 years. And so punishment versus treatment. So we wouldn't ever, and I'm going to disclaim this. This is it's a difficult subject to talk about, because we all know people who are affected by a substance use disorder. We all know people who are affected by other horrific long-term chronic diseases. And so if somebody's experiencing a long-term addiction issue, folks, by and large, historically, have said, well, that's a, fill in the blank label. If it were some other horrific long-term disease, chronic disease, people would show far more compassion. If somebody had a relapse to this horrible disease, communities rally around people, families rally around people. They provide encouragement, love, support, and all the resources that families can collect, and just love on that person and support them and care for them through that. And whether it be a relapse issue or even, this is where the conversation is really difficult. Even if some of those horrible chronic diseases that are more traditional in nature that we may be thinking of, we may be dealing with ourselves or have somebody really, really close to us dealing with this, that some of those things are perpetuated by human behavior, are they not? Like, everything is behavioral. Medical issues are behavioral. If, I have a stomach problem, right? I've had it for my entire life. If I don't take my stomach pill in the morning, it's going to be a rough day. I'm going to have some pain, I'm going to be distracted, and I'm probably not going to be as good for the people around me as I would have been had I not, had I just taken my little stomach pill in the morning. And so that's a behavioral thing. If I skip that in the morning, I chose to do that, or either I forgot to do it, or my plan for the day went a little bit awry. And so there's really no difference in the disease model of addiction. And so compassion, I'm not saying, Chief Clare, I'm not advocating for people to commit crimes.
No, but Rick, here's what I think you're touching on, and this gets us ahead, really. But so there's a balance, right? So there's, again, if we go back to the fabric, there's got to be a reparative justice for victims, right? Those who face the consequences of crimes created. But there's got to be a restorative justice for the offender. And I think the drug court, I think the Appalachian Center for Hope, I think all those things, like we're talking about an ecosystem, right? It's not just like subtraction, like there's a kind of a bad thread in the fabric, we pull it out, we get rid of it, right? The point is to sew it back up and put it, and that takes an entire ecosystem of people, and mental health, physical health, financial health, emotional health, it's all got to come together. Otherwise, we're just bailing out the Titanic. It doesn't matter how many buckets we pull out, it's still taking on water. And that takes the whole community. When I first came to Marion in 2018, I made a comment about that if we wanted to make a difference in addiction, we had to talk about it at the dinner table. And I know that sounds a little silly until you realize how many people don't talk about it at the dinner table, even when they have family members suffering from addiction and its consequences, until the conversation is very public and until everybody's involved. Like you mentioned, we could have I don't know, we could have a fire in Marion and have a family that might suffer injury in terms of, you know, objects and possessions and financial future, and the community will rally around that. And we've got to have that same attitude for addiction, and otherwise it's not going to change, right? We're not trying to create like this bifurcated society where we have all the people who aren't addicted doing all the things they're doing, and then all the other people doing all the things they're doing. It's got to be all together.
And what you're referencing, Chief, is a trauma-informed community, and that's also what John was referencing with the school system. And so if you know, trauma-informed care is a very deep dive, and if we all play a part in that, from educational system, judicial system, mental health care, behavioral health care, medical care, legal, you know, all of the systems working together, the churches, the spiritual community, you know, families, everybody working together, understanding this concept, we can make a huge difference.
And in order to do that, right, one of the first things we have to do is ditch the war motif, right?
That's right.
The battle narrative.
Right.
Right? So it's not any of that, right? It's victims creating other victims and kind of stopping that feedback loop and interjecting there in the right place, and then providing some alternative so they don't slip back into it. One thing that I'm always a little surprised by is when I hear people talk about Marion, some of whom have dealt with addiction issues or have had engagement with the criminal justice system, they say this place is just terrible. And I think to myself, man, I don't see that at all. And that's because we're in two different loops, right? My life feedback loop doesn't include any of those things, but theirs does. And we got to find a way to interrupt that and kind of switch them over to the other track.
So one of the things that I say a lot as a treatment professional is that people don't just stop doing things. There's one thing that everybody in this room gets the exact same amount of, and that's 168 hours per week. No, not one more minute, not one less minute. We all get the exact same amount of time, regardless of socioeconomic status, regardless of background, regardless of medical, regardless of anything. And so we all get the same amount of time. And so when people are in active addiction, they have developed those coping skills that you were referencing a little earlier. And so that's a means to a little bit better, at least temporary solution to something. It may be not be a great long-term solution, but it's a solution in that moment.
And I think that we would all agree that recovery doesn't happen in a vacuum. You're all referring to how we need to have the conversations over the dinner table when in our schools and amongst different community members. I'd like to kind of invite John Graham to speak a little bit about that, the value of partnerships in recovery and the value of partnerships in a community. What does that look like to you? How do you see that playing an important role in the recovery process?
Let me start with this quote from Helen Keller. Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. And what you've asked really opens the door for me to tell you a little bit about the Appalachian Center for Hope. We all know when Wellmont combined forces with Mountain States and it became Ballad, the Smith County Community Hospital had to do a needs assessment of the community. And so I've seen that done in different ways, sometimes by Zoom or even just using data that already exists. At this particular time, they called in, 20 different community leaders or people who provide different services from different sectors. And so we were all gathered in the hospital conference room, and we were charged to come up with what are the top 3 problems facing our community. And, we had all the charts on the wall, and we all got into our little groups and debated and argued about different things, and we came up with, no surprise, substance abuse was among the top 3 problems that we had. The most chilling thing was to see NAS babies that we led the state in per capita number of children who were basically addicted at birth, per capita. And that was stunning. I mean, how do you explain that? If that doesn't kind of grab you by the collar and say, man, you've got a problem. When I was a lawyer and practiced criminal defense work, I'd have people in my office who'd just gotten a DUI, and they'd say, I don't have a problem. Well, you're in my office. You've just been charged with DUI. You've got a problem of some sort because you're here with me. If we have the leading NAS babies per capita, we have a problem. And so in this room, there were several leaders, among them some who said, look, we can't just identify this problem. We got to do something about it. You can't just, okay, so what? We discovered this problem. We've got to do something about it. And so there was a real resolve to walk out of there and make a difference in fighting that problem. And so a number of things happened. We started meeting on a regular basis, and these are folks who are from all different, you mentioned several different disciplines, and that's what we were. Different types of community services, and some folks who were in recovery themselves wound up in the group. And that collaboration, that cooperation, benefiting from the insights of others who have expertise in another area than I do. It's hard to see the picture when you're inside the frame. And I'm in my own little frame, and I don't always see the whole picture. But with your help and with your help and other people's help, I have the ability to see better and perceive. And so to gain the insight and the expertise from others has made all the difference in the world. As a result of that cooperation and collaboration, there have been a number of things that have taken place. I mean, I mentioned the school system and the emphasis on trauma-informed care. Well, I mean, that's one of the things that we talked about early on. And so Dr. Dennis Carter was in that group. He's actually the one who said, we either deal with this problem or go home and call ourselves losers. I mean, that's the resolve that he brought to the table. And so, I mean, it has affected this whole community by having that collaborative effort. And, yeah, I mean, that's really where the answer lies, isn't it? In us working together from our different areas of expertise and insight.
I see lots of faces in the audience from Appalachian Substance Abuse Coalition and meetings. Man, I just chief cheerleader. I have the honor of serving you guys as your vice chair, and being in a lot of initiatives related to that. So Appalachian Substance Abuse Coalition is a pretty broad spectrum of what's being discussed here. There are representatives that the coalition's been in existence about 20 years. There are 600 plus members. There are usually 60, 70, 80 people that show up to a meeting every other month for a couple hours or so. We say 2 hours, but it's usually more like 2.5, maybe 3. But then we have about 8,000 people following us on Facebook. And so if you don't know about it, join forces. There are always so many initiatives. Linda Austin, executive director. Most of you've seen Linda, or you've seen her on the news about every week lately. And,
Rick, for those who are unfamiliar with the coalition, could you maybe describe some of the outcomes or some of the results of some of their initiatives or some of the positive things that have come from that?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Lots of initiatives, and so fentanyl awareness days have been a huge topic of late. Those have occurred all over Southwest Virginia in schools. School superintendents, principals, been entirely very, very supportive of that initiative, getting word out. Narcan trainings, and so tons and tons of Narcan trainings. It's a sobering thought. I'm going to quote a physician that many of us are familiar with. I'm quoting him. He's in recovery, and he says, I can't treat dead people. That's sobering. That is really, really sobering. That's a Stephen Lloyd quote, Dr. Stephen Lloyd, and so he lived through his own OxyContin addiction some time ago, and now treats people in that way and does a lot of talks. And so we have to help people have a better way. And so like replacing the time, there has to be something better that is there, a better alternative, a better coping skill, a better network, a better group of supporters to help rally around.
Thank you very much, Rick. And I want to go to John Graham to expound on that a little bit, because you talked about the Appalachian Center for Hope. That word hope is so important, isn't it? Because it's not all bad. There is a lot of hope here, right? So creating partnerships builds that hope. I'm wondering if you could talk, as a community leader, what do you think is needed to address the addiction problem going forward?
Well, the to-do list for what needs to be done in our community is, many pages long. But let me just mention two that are really important. First would be piggybacking on what Chief Clare has said, being honest about our problem, getting your head out of the sand. Owning up, hey, we have a problem. Now, we're not unique. Many places have problems. I dare say every place in Southwest Virginia, every place perhaps has a problem. But owning up to it, it's hard to build a response to a problem if you don't acknowledge it. And I think that's one of the essential things. And I think that's something that we can say we're doing. I mean, the fact that we're having this. In many of the groups, and ASAC is one, we hear comments that, hey, Smith County, you all are doing something well. You're at least working together. And that comes from, I think, that first bit is acknowledging, owning up to the problem. But the second is something we got a lot of work left to do. And that is, well, stigma, and a willingness to a community-wide willingness to address the problem. So a popular thing that we refer to sometimes is not in my backyard. How many people want to have treatment for people in? How many people? Let me rephrase it. Who wants to make treatment available for people who have substance use disorder? Yes, everybody would cheer for that. Who wants it across the street from your house? It's a smaller, yeah. It's a smaller cheer, and that is something that we. One of your questions was, what does substance abuse look like? And it looks like me. I mean, it looks like Rick. One of the most interesting talks that I've been a part of, listening, the hospital for a time hosted continuing education things for pastors to help pastors deal with substance abuse and how to respond to that issue in our churches. And we brought in a speaker who is a pastor in Washington County, and went through his opioid addiction, and he worked through it, and his congregation was supportive in that period of time, but he suffered, and he having a fellow pastor address this room full of pastors and saying, look, this could happen to you. I went and had surgery, and I was prescribed this, and the next thing I knew, I couldn't live without it. And we go home, and you look in the mirror at night and say, that could be me. That could be me. And I think our challenge is to see not just fellow pastors or whoever is like us in like professional sense, but to see everybody as someone who is like me. They've suffered some trauma, likely, and they have a different. I mean, they've got some struggles.
So it could really look like anyone. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that addiction could also look like people who don't look like any of us on this stage here tonight, and that everyone is important, and having a multiculturally responsive approach is very important to include everyone in the conversation as well. Thank you for your insights about that, John. Something about what you said leads me to Chief Clare as another community leader. You know, I think it's fair to say that law enforcement can have mixed perceptions. You know, people may have mixed perceptions about law enforcement.
You don't say.
So I really just wanted to ask and just acknowledge that it seems like you have been a leader in changing the perception of how law enforcement goes about dealing with and addressing and helping the substance use problem. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I've tried. So part of my goal in Marion is to create a flourishing society where every person at every part of the strata is contributing and living together. And, you know, John was talking about kind of owning up to it. Where's something else we have to own up to? We can't fully prevent it, right? Our communities are permeable. Things will come into them. And it's not something utterly curable. And so the goal in Marion or anywhere should be to create resiliency, right? So this is what we talk about in kind of law enforcement or emergency response. Listen, we can't prevent violence. We can do things that might discourage violence, but the real key is building a resilient community. So it's response and recovery. We can take some mitigation action, but the real key is building resilience so that we can recover from it more quickly and more completely, and it doesn't go on so long. And then, you know, there's kind of all the victimization and all the lives shattered in the wake. And I kind of wonder, and it probably exists, and John or Rick's about to tell me this. Do we not have a quick start guide for recovery from addiction, right? Do we not have a series of steps, a series of probable outcomes that we can begin? I'm sure we do, and we need to make sure that those are strong. So there can be this kind of ball carrier, right? Like, you know, it kind of starts here, and then it just goes and goes and goes. And I know the drug court's probably a good example of that. And I'm sure that there's programs that are a good example of that. And then also be honest about the aesthetic, and I think that's exactly what you were getting at, where it's not always people that look like us. And I'll tell you, one of the most frustrating things in law enforcement is those calls for, you know, there's some people here and they're maybe looking a particular way. And that's what it looks like. I don't know what to tell you, right? That's what it looks like. And attempts to suppress that is us lying to ourselves and pretending like it's not here. And so instead of doing that, we should be helping those folks recover and have the kind of lives that they want to have. Law enforcement has a unique role in society, primarily as the tip of the spear. So there were plenty of people who would say that we don't belong in this conversation. The reality is we're the front line. See, look, there's a kind of a warfare term I shouldn't have used, right? We're the, you know, I can't avoid it, right? We're the leading edge. We're the tip of the spear. You see how ingrained it is, right? We're the first people that most people are likely to meet in crisis, whatever that crisis may be. And so one way we're trying to reshape things is we can facilitate more than delivery into the justice system. We can facilitate programs. We can facilitate information. The Crisis Center is a great example of that. Where we can take that unique position we have and try to deliver more solutions.
It also sounds like you're bringing in some trauma-informed care approaches of showing compassion to people as you respond to the crisis.
And making sure that they're humanized. So this is something, don't get me started or we'll run out of time. So I am very sensitive to ideas of statistics and data. We're currently involved in data wars. These are meaningless. People are people, and they need real humanistic engagement. And the more we take the numbers, and then we try to adjust the numbers, and we forget that there's communities and lives and all of that, and it's almost like we become mathematical solvers trying to adjust equations to some point that makes us feel good about something. So I can tell you in 5 years in Marion, we've reduced overall crime by 41%. find that anywhere else. But that doesn't matter if your lived experience is not, half again better, right? I mean, there's got to be a reality behind it. And so we are trying very hard to make sure that we're not forgetting the contours and complexity of the people that are involved, because we're not trying to create an even balance sheet. We're trying to create a society that's genuinely flourishing.
Thank you, because you're talking about human beings here and how complex that can be. And you're talking about solutions. How can we work together to, benefit society? I want to go to Dr. Matuszek because I'm wondering if you might be able to talk about what some of those protective factors might be. Chief Clare asked, is there a step-by-step or a manual or a quick guide for how do we recover? I'm wondering if you might be able to speak to, protective factors for the brain's recovery and maybe even community's recovery.
Absolutely. And when it comes to recovery, that's very, very complicated, and I'll get to that in a second. I think one key factor is kind of the prevention. What can be protective for someone before they develop a substance use disorder? And, some of the things that we see are things like being able to cope with stressful events in life, learning coping techniques that don't involve seeking out a substance, learning stress management. Again, it's kind of this holistic idea that we have to address the whole individual. Learning some self-control. And again, that's one, especially with young people that we see, and with all of the social media and the technology that we have today, people are very used to kind of instant gratification. I want to know this information, so, hey Alexa, what's the weather in Albuquerque? And you know it right that second. And that affects our overall behavior, which then can feed into substance use. So if we're able to teach people to not have to have that instant gratification, maybe, you can wait 5 minutes to find out what the weather is in Albuquerque. Maybe you can actually call somebody in Albuquerque to find out instead of asking Alexa. A lot of it is human connection, human understanding, and understanding our own behaviors, why we do certain things, and how we can control them to a certain extent. Once substance abuse has kind of taken hold, a lot of it, again, goes back to the trauma-informed care. It's treating someone as a whole person and giving them the resources that they need for every aspect of their life, not just for their substance use disorder. And I think one thing that we've sort of been dancing around but haven't really addressed yet is we keep talking about recovery. And recovery is exactly that. It's not a cure. People aren't just magically, you're addicted one day and you're not addicted the next. Recovery is a lifelong process. And it's important to understand that people are going to relapse. And again, that's not a moral failing. It's not, a personal issue. It's because of something that happened to them, because of the way their brain has been wired, because they're dealing with some kind of stressful situation. And so, again, we have to kind of rally as a community around someone if that happens and say, hey, okay, you were in recovery, you relapsed, it happened, now let's move on. Let's get you back into recovery. Let's get you back moving in the right direction. And there are also some harm reduction techniques that, can assist in that aspect. Or for someone that maybe isn't fully ready for recovery yet, let's at least keep them alive until they are ready. Like you said, I can't treat someone if they're dead. And so I think harm reduction is another important component for communities to really kind of support. But it requires a change in the way that we think about addiction and that we think about, people with substance use disorders. We have to change the idea that this is some kind of failing of the individual and realize, okay, this is a disease. It can happen to anyone. It does happen to anyone. And now, how can we prevent people from being injured or dying in this process? you know, even if it means you're still doing drugs, but at least you're doing them in a safer manner. At least you're doing it with, you know, clean paraphernalia, things like that. You're not adding disease factors on top of the drug abuse problem. You know, I think those are all really important things to keep in mind in terms of, you know, community outreach and how communities can help.
Thank you for zooming out a little bit there and giving us a nice overview, broad picture of what this really looks like. And you've read my mind about harm reduction. I wanted to invite Rick to talk a little bit more about the harm reduction approach versus abstinence approach, or just some of the value in either approach and how that's seen in treatment. And as you talk, I'm going to ask John Graham and Chief Clare for their responses or just insights from a community perspective of what Rick and Dr. Matuszek share about that.
You know, harm reduction is always a controversial subject, but I'm not entirely sure of all of the dynamics of why.
Because of how it looks.
And perhaps a lack of understanding.
Because of how it looks. And the aesthetic bothers us. That's why.
Thank you.
People seem to have an idea that by providing a safe means to use drugs, that we're somehow promoting drug use, rather than just trying to help people.
I mean, it needs to be said, at one point, we were the third jurisdiction in the state of Virginia to have a comprehensive harm reduction program. And Tammy is the director of that program. Are we still the only third in the state? All right, there's 6. And Smith County is one of them. I mean, that's an extraordinary thing. And part of that took place because some folks who have been, who learned about trauma-informed care in our discussions, Sheriff Chip Schuler went to the Board of Supervisors and said, hey, we're not going to arrest our way out of this problem. We got to be creative. Extreme times require extreme measures, perhaps. And the CEO of the hospital, James Tyler, went to the Board of Supervisors when it was discussed, and it passed in Smith County. And Tammy gave me some data about it. And in the past year, there were 167 people who had overdosed since their previous visit and were saved by Narcan and the Narcan training that they'd had. 361 had reversed someone else's overdose. Those are lives that are saved. I mean, that's extraordinary. If you can't treat dead people, I mean, that's a reason why we have comprehensive harm reduction right there.
Mm-hmm. And before we get too far ahead, I think Dr. Matuszek gave some good examples, but I'm wondering, Rick, from a treatment perspective, if you could explain to those maybe in the audience who are not really familiar with those terms, what harm reduction means versus abstinence-based treatment and what it looks like on a treatment perspective.
Certainly, and I think one angle to take the one of the many answers to this wonderful question is medication-assisted treatment. And so, you know, I mentioned earlier, I mean, I have, you know, this gastroesophageal reflux disease, right? It sounds like, oh, well, heartburn, right? Okay, well, yeah, okay, heartburn. And so if I don't take my medicine, I'm going to have heartburn. And, I'm pretty sure that's called medication-assisted treatment. Is it not? And so if you use the disease model concept, you know, everything's individualized. People come to the table with whatever it is that they bring to that table, and it looks different for everybody. I mean, there are no two exact same situations, and so each and every one of the people that comes to whoever it is that they come to for help, whether it be a treatment professional, a police officer, an educator, an attorney, you know, whoever it is, a pastor, a friend, whoever that is, every path isn't the same. And one of the very, evidence-based practices, one of the proven strategies for saving lives is medication-assisted treatment for people with a substance use disorder. And so in our residential programs, we offer that. We're not the prescribers, but we partner with reputable providers who are compassionate and who connect and spend the time that's needed to learn about that individual person and what the need is. And any given day, probably close to 60% of the people in our residential facilities are prescribed some sort of medication-assisted treatment. Lots of times that's something like Suboxone. It may be Vivitrol. It may be, a host of other things. So what happens in those situations is that a person takes their medication and they're able to maintain healthy social relationships. They're able to seek employment. They're able to prevent further disease. They're able to, the list goes on and on and on. They're able to connect with, if they choose to do so, a spiritual community, a pastor, an entire support system, and people build family relationships back from broken pieces, and so it's not that much different than me taking my Protonics in the morning. It really isn't.
Yeah. Along those lines, I wonder if, Dr. Matuszak, you could educate our audience a little bit about, what happens in the body and what happens in the brain when addiction is occurring, and how tolerance, plays a role in that and can make recovery, difficult, which brings in why harm reduction approaches can be valuable. Abstinence is always the goal, obviously, but can you tell us a little bit about that whole process?
Absolutely. So in terms of tolerance, it happens when a person continually uses a substance, and essentially your body wants to maintain balance. It wants to keep homeostasis. So when you put this substance in your body and it goes way up, your body fights it, and it says, no, we're going to bring it back down. And so essentially your neurotransmitters start to do the opposite of what the drug is doing in a means to try to keep that balance. And so the longer and the more of a drug a person uses, they build a tolerance to where they need more and more of that drug to get the same effect that they were getting in the beginning. And so that is where, addiction gets very complicated and also gets very dangerous, because obviously the more a person takes, the more likely they are to potentially overdose. It's also very important when it comes to being in recovery, because a lot of people don't necessarily realize how quickly they can lose that tolerance. And so if they do have a relapse and they try to take the same amount that they had been taking, that's pretty much going to be an instant overdose, because their body is not ready for that. It's not prepared to fight that much of the substance. And so that tends to be why, unfortunately, we do see a lot of people that are in long-term recovery, and they may have just one slip. And I actually just had a friend that happened to this weekend that he didn't make it. And it's incredibly tragic. And but it's a reminder that we have to keep trying. It's important to keep the science in mind, but also keep the human being in mind. And I think, understanding tolerance, and also something else I want to mention in terms of kind of brain changes and a learning aspect of addiction. A lot of people don't think, you're learning things when you're using drugs. But actually, you have a lot of conditioning going on when a person is using a substance. For instance, the location where they are when they're using it starts to get associated with that substance. The other people that are around, the items that they're using, the paraphernalia, whatever items they have around them start to get associated with that drug, and they become triggers. And so something that's important to keep in mind when people are in recovery is you need to stay as far away from those triggers as possible. If there was a certain place where you use drugs, don't go anywhere near it. Change, if you drive past it, take a different route, go somewhere else. If you had people that you used to use drugs with, stay away from them, because that is going to instantly trigger your brain to start craving that substance again. And again, these are things that I can get into much more, scientific detail with, but that's not really what's important. What's important is let's take this information and use it to help people. And so it's important to keep that in mind. The more you can change your routines, change your situation in recovery, the less likely you are to have those triggers to then, potentially trigger a relapse.
I wonder if you could elaborate on the age-related differences in the brain, the way maybe it affects adolescents differently than adults.
Wow, and that that one gets very complicated very quickly. But one thing we know is that a lot of times adolescents are less sensitive to some of the more obvious intoxicating effects of certain substances, especially alcohol. Adolescents have this incredible ability to drink a large amount of alcohol and not appear as intoxicated as an adult would. However, a lot of the more dangerous aspects, the memory impairment, the neural changes associated with it, adolescents are more sensitive to. And so it kind of creates this perfect storm where they're less sensitive to the intoxicating effects that would tell them to stop drinking. So they're able to get to themselves to much higher, potentially overdose levels, while they're more sensitive to the dangerous effects, the memory impairment, the potential for continued use and abuse. And so again, that adolescent period, that like 10 to 20 age range, is so important to, focus on for prevention and, if we can, early treatment if that's necessary. The younger we deal with this, the better. I know, Captain, you kept mentioning, talking about it at the dinner table. I know a lot of people are not comfortable with that, but it's becoming more and more important. And I'm seeing now, especially in the Southwest Virginia and Southern West Virginia areas, people are writing children's books about addiction and substance use. And I'll be honest, I have a 5-year-old. I've read her some of these books so that, you want them to know the dangers, you want them to know the situation, but also to start early not creating a stigma. That, hey, this is something that happens.
I was just going to say that what happens is there's a man named Marvin Olasky who wrote a book called The Tragedy of American Compassion. And he talks about compassion fatigue, where it starts very personal, but then we kind of get fatigued with that, and then it goes maybe to a group, and then that group gets fatigued, and then it's an agency, and the agency gets fatigued, and then it's just some other, right? So it's like some pathway. It's a train with no station, right? And we just keep sending it on. And so what I'm getting at with the dinner table and stuff like that is rewinding that to make it much more personalized, so it's not like, the police are engaging with that, and we'll call you, right? And then you'll call someone else, and then you'll call someone else, and then we're 27 calls down the chain, and nothing has changed when we could have probably just dealt with it right up front. But that's hard, right? And there's that fatigue. So we get weary of well-doing when it comes to stuff like that.
Chief Clare, that's exactly why I asked that question to Dr. Matuszek in the adolescent perspective, what's going on in the brain, because you mentioned some triggers earlier, or the conditioning of, hanging out with certain friends or certain environments that are going to keep the problem going. Because I imagine Chief Clare and John Graham see this in the community a lot. As a minister, maybe you're hearing some of these stories. As a police chief, you're seeing some of the legal issues about that. So wanted to bring that home to how we see it in our youth in the communities, because they are such an important population to address this with. John, could you speak to that at all from what you see from that perspective on that population?
I guess I would go back to the painting that was made by the fingerprints of the children. I mean, they know about it. They know their issues. They know that there are problems in their families. We might as well talk about it at the dinner table. I mean,
yeah. I think doing interventions like that, or you mentioned the coalition, Rick, all the different initiatives, those things are so important to bring this topic to light. That's one of the reasons that we're having, this event, to have open dialogue about it. I kind of want to just go back to Chief Clare about we're looking at maybe it's forward thinking and forward solutions, kind of a solution-focused perspective about what do we do now? What do we do about this? I'd like to ask all of you to think about that. What do we do now? So from the law enforcement perspective, what strategies do you think are important?
So for one, I think we need vertical integration, right? All levels of our society must be engineered so that they're meeting help at each level along the way, right? So the entry point, unfortunately, is likely going to be law enforcement, unless they volunteer for help, or I'm sure there's plenty of addiction that I don't see because they do volunteer for help, or they get referred by someone, or they have enough money to make it not so obvious. But typically, that's the beginning stage, and then so educating us to make sure, let's see this for what it is, or is right? Is this a mere possession or mere use, or have other victims been created? And then making sure that we're kind of flowing that into the right direction, but the problem is somebody's got to be able to pick it up from there. So integrating those steps to make sure, or to at least hope, that there can be a clean handoff from one direction to another, because otherwise what happens is we see it manifest in the unhoused. There's a man named Sam Quiones, I think that's how you say his name, who's doing a lot of work. He wrote a book called The Least of Us. He's doing work in California. He's talking about new synthetic methamphetamines and how the brain is being rewired. So it's not like you get addicted to meth, you stop using meth, and you go back to normal. You get addicted to that meth, you stop using that, you don't go back to normal. You go somewhere completely different. And it's really creating, and so there's got to be somebody to pick that up, because no matter how good the counseling or how good the services or how good the support, it's almost like the benefits cliff, right? Where you're making enough money that suddenly you stop receiving help, and then it just goes down from there.
How would you add to that, Rick, from, say, like that vertical collaboration perspective? How do you see the role of treatment, or going back to our original question about how programs like ours are producing therapists, and how would you respond to what Chief Clare was saying?
I mean, it's all connection. And so in ASAC, we say all the time, connection is the opposite of addiction. And so integration at those different levels is key. That develops connection. And so things like what we're doing right now, getting people either on the stage together, in the room together, communicating about it, develops understanding. One of my favorite authors, Andy Stanley, says that those who judge people haven't listened to the stories of those they're judging. And so listening and understanding what the issues are from different angles. To John's point, we all have different perspectives. We see things that other people don't see because of the angle we're looking at it. And when we pull groups of people together to see those, to understand and listen and connect around those different angles, that's when we can develop that vertical hierarchy, so to speak, and develop those connections in a stronger way. Not sure if that answers the question.
Absolutely. I'd like to invite Dr. Matuszek and John to expand on that if you have any additional thoughts to share. Where we go from here. what do you see as maybe a proactive step, to take?
I mean, I think definitely, John, what you were talking about with the educational system in Smith County, I think you all are doing a lot already to move in the right direction, to kind of take that holistic approach to helping people, to educating kids, to, making sure that the resources are there. I think the biggest thing now is we need more. We're seeing that we have such a huge issue that the resources we have are just not enough. And so, programs like at Emory and Henry, where we're producing more counselors, more people that can help with the situation, the more recovery facilities that we have, the better the outcomes are going to be. I know in my area around Bluefield, to get a bed in a recovery facility is almost impossible at times because every place is just full. And so it's more. I think we're doing the right things. We just need to keep building.
It's a perfect dovetail for me to talk about the Appalachian Center for Hope. I think part of the plan has to be to identify where are the gaps, where are the holes in services that are available or not available. And that's what gave rise to what the Appalachian Center for Hope is hoping to do. And that is to renovate a building on the grounds of the state hospital for use as a residential treatment facility for folks who have a substance use disorder. And when we started this process 4 or 5 years ago, there were no active residential treatment facilities in Southwest Virginia. None. Zero. Now, since that time in Bristol, Rick and his partner, Bob Garrett, have started one called Bristol Lifestyle Recovery, and that's been in existence 2 years now.
3 plus.
3 plus, yeah. 2 weeks ago, or a month, within the last month, a second facility opened in Abingdon. It's called Mended Women, and its population is exclusively women. But the Appalachian Center for Hope will be a 62 to 65 bed facility. If you go to the state hospital and you see the round circle, it's called Bagley Circle, and that big, beautiful building, if you turn left, the first building that you encounter is the warden's house and the assistant warden, and then the next building that you encounter is 281 Bagley Circle, and that is commonly known as the rehab building, and it will become, eventually, the Appalachian Center for Hope. On October the 13th, all of you are invited. The Attorney General, Jason Mayares, is going to visit and take a tour of the building at 11 a.m. and bring some publicity and some excitement to this effort. And hopefully, he'll bring a deed with him when he comes, and then we can start working on actually put the bid out for everything. So, but looking at the gaps, what does not exist? That's what we did. And if you think about it, people who have acute problems, they need to be detoxed. So where do they do that? They go to, there are a number of places where you might have a 3 to 5 day detox experience, or a jail where it'd be much longer a detox experience. And then what? Then what do? You're released, and you might have all the gumption to avoid substances, but then you're going back to all your triggers. So what was the gap? It's that residential treatment place where you can have the supportive environment and all the encouragement and the medical professionals around you for 3 to 5 months. And that's what we're hoping to do, mirroring what they do in Bristol and in Abingdon. And so the next step is what do you do after that? And our goal is to figure out a way to provide transitional supportive housing. And that's something that will be needed, because as I understand it, and I hope you will correct me if I'm wrong, but the brain is not healed until at least 18 months of being sober. So, providing those supports to people who are in recovery for at least 18 months seems like a no-brainer.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing those ideas and insights and for being a part of the collective communal recovery process. We're winding down the initial portion of tonight's event, and so before we go to the question and answer portion, I'd like to invite each of you to share any insights or ideas that you just haven't gotten out yet. Any message that you'd like to share, any final takeaways or any thoughts that you'd like to just share with our audience, whether you're speaking to people in our physical audience here, people who are on our live stream audience, whether you're talking directly to our nursing students or our counseling students, talking directly to people who are struggling with addiction actively right now, or talking to people in recovery or the families of those people, any and all of those people who this affects, what are, in just a minute or so each of you, what are some parting comments that you'd like to leave with everyone?
Yeah, I just think about, all these conversations about needs and transitional housing and residential care and detoxification. I mean, all these different things. What we know is that this is a human issue. By and large, when we try to take steps that are too large, we fall. When we take small incremental steps and experience success in that step, we're encouraged to take another step. And so filling in that continuum of care, covering those gaps, ensuring that we will have enough transitional housing for people who are completing detox programs and then residential treatment programs, and the list goes on and on. The problem, as we've defined well, is way too big to incarcerate. We weren't able to incarcerate the problem a long time ago, and that has only gotten bigger and worse. And so filling in those gaps with supportive transitional services, enabling people to take small incremental steps, and experiencing success and hope and living.
Thank you.
I'll stop there.
The author of Raising Lazarus and Dope Sick, I can't think of her name.
Beth Mason.
Beth Mason. Oh. Well, I went to Emory and Henry to hear her speak, and she was remarkable. I so enjoyed her talk, and one of the most compelling stories she said was about a person who went with some misgivings, with great hesitation, to a recovery center. And they didn't know what door to go into, and they went in the one door, and they were nervous, they were fidgety, and the receptionist said, could tell that maybe they were hungry. And I don't know how they perceived that, but they said, "Hey, would you like a sandwich? Hey, my name is John. Would you like a sandwich?" And instantly they felt better. I mean, they felt not better. They felt connected. They felt welcomed. They felt like, oh, well, they care here. And maybe, I mean, your point is, what's a word for all of us? A word for all of us is to care and to show care. I mean, what does it mean to say you love somebody if love isn't in action? What does it mean to say you care if it's not acted out in your feet and your hands and how you live? So I think that's the word, is to care.
Thank you.
And that leads perfectly into one of my favorite experiments to talk about in terms of addiction. For a long time, lab studies on addiction were very kind of separated from the human experience. A rat in a cage is a little bit hard to compare to what a human goes through. And so for a long time, there was this idea that, with addictive substances, if you give a rat, a button or a lever that they can press to, administer a substance, a lot of times they will keep going. They will not eat, drink, do anything else. They will just keep pushing that button until they die. And so it kind of created this idea that, you know, these substances are the problem. But then someone came along and said, okay, well, you're looking at a single rat in an empty cage by itself that's forced to live that way. Rats are social animals. They don't like being by themselves. And obviously, they have got to be bored to tears. There is nothing to do in that cage. So someone came along and created what they called Rat Park. And I see some of you are nodding. I'm sure you've heard of this study before. Essentially, what they did is they set up a playground for rats. A big cage with, you know, things they could crawl through, things they could play with, bedding that they could burrow in, and other rats that they could spend time with. And then they gave them that same button where they could administer, I think cocaine might have been what they were using at that point. And all of a sudden they saw that there were a couple of rats that were going over and, you know, pressing the button a little bit. But for the most part, they really were not really using the drug that much. And a lot of that does come back to the human experience. You know, we see substance use issues when people feel isolated, when they feel like they're not connected to other people. And so that, again, it seems like such a simple thing to just care, to talk to somebody, to just reach out and say, hey, you know, you can call me if you need anything. But that goes a long way. It really does.
Thank you, Dr. Maciusiak. And speaking of caring, just like to say I'm sorry for the recent loss that you shared earlier. Thank you for sharing that with us.
I think when we were down here, that's what we were talking about, right? Like the alienation that's created by so many things. And you know, I won't take up all night talking about it, but we are turning everything, what we're talking about is turning everything into plastic, right? You've got a wood desk with a tree that grew and somebody cut it down and they shaped it and it has being. And then we make a plastic desk designed to look like wood, and you're trading the symbol for the reality. And that's what we do with absolutely everything now. We wipe away the reality and we trade symbols for it, and that's ultimately what addictive substances become, right? Symbols for joy, symbols for calmness, symbols for all those things, instead of experiencing it. And we end up totalizing everything and actualizing nothing. And so I don't want to be the chief of police anywhere else. I'm the chief of police of Marion. I'm not interested in what is happening, you know, all over America. We've got a lot of stuff going on here. But what's funny is most of the daily conversation deals with something that's been totalized from somewhere else, right? Some issue that has absolutely nothing to do with our local community becomes the buzz and the talking point and all of that. I love when people ask me, John, did you hear about this? And I say, absolutely not, because I don't have Facebook, man. 2020 broke me on that. I got rid of it, right? And now I can actually see in front of my face instead of looking at things all over the place. And so I'm committed to that here with the people who are here and dealing with things here. And that's the way that I'm going to run the Marion Police Department. And I appreciate all of you guys. I appreciate especially, I think there's something maybe you don't know about John, that it's not his job to set up the Appalachian Center for Hope. Do you realize that? It's not his job. He wants to be here in the community and do things for the community. There's no gap between who he is and who he wants to be. He's doing it. And Rick is doing it, and we're all doing it. And so we just can't do it alone, right? Like, we can't carry all of that on our own. We don't have the capacity to do it. And so we need everybody to join in with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for sharing everything that you've shared with us so far. And we're going to segue over to our question and answer portion, if you'll indulge with your good graces a little further to turn over to the question and answer. And I'm going to call upon our colleague, Dr. Cassie Sheffy, to run the Q&A portion.
All right. Can you guys hear me okay? Fantastic. So student volunteers are going to be coming down the aisles. If you have written a question on a card, just hold it up and they'll get it for you. Some housekeeping. If you are here as a nurse and getting continuing education credit, please drop off your evaluation on your way out, okay? If you're a physical therapy student, do not forget to sign the list for Dr. Coley. And then if you're here for Lyceum credit, do not forget to scan the barcode on your way out as well. All right, so we're getting some questions. Thank you. Thank you. All right, panel, here's your softballs, okay? So, how can I help myself deal with a family member who struggles with substance abuse?
I think everybody's looking at the treatment guy. The fact that they're connecting with you is a positive from the get-go, and it's connection. It's if let's think Maslow's hierarchy here for just a second. It's hard to think about self-actualization if you're hungry, right? So let's offer to take somebody out for breakfast. Offer a meal. Offer some option of connection, and listen, and just be compassionate. And we have two ears and one mouth. Let's use them proportionately at times. I'm terrible at that, but let's connect. And so just providing compassion, support, love. Maybe the person needs a jacket. People in recovery talk about relapse triggers as being halt, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. And so if this person is any or all of those things, help stand in the gap. That's a good start. And then reach out to resources. And so folks here, police departments, educational systems, behavioral health systems, community service boards, they're ASAC. There are lots of support systems that can help point you to some help, but it really starts with connection.
Would anyone else like to add to that?
I would say make sure they know that you are there to be supportive, and that if they need help finding treatment, that you will help them with that, but don't push. The more you push, generally, the more they're going to push away, and they're not going to want to talk about it at all. So, like Rick said, be supportive, help them with what they need that you can help with. Ask them, do they need a grocery delivery? Do they need a jacket? Do they need some place to sleep for the night? And then just be there when they're ready.
I think you also brought up earlier the disease model. We can recognize that addiction is often referred to as a family disease as well. I think it's important for our families to understand that there's a lot of support out there, for them, support groups, treatment providers can help the families as well, even if they're not the identified client.
All right, thank you guys. So we will try to get through all of the questions that we can. We will have to stop at 7:30, so I'm going to try and ask a question from every card, okay? So our next question is for Chief Claire specifically. How many of your officers do you send through the CIT training with Highland Community Services?
All of them.
Thank you. That was an easy one.
So I say that believing that we are about to complete that process. I think we have 5 or 6 signed up for a class in the third week of October. I'm not 100% sure, but if it's not all of them, it's going to be all of them. The goal is that every single one of them goes, because we now realize that we need that skill set more than ever. We're going to send absolutely everyone through it. We'll send them to trauma-informed care as well, right? I'm sure that there are programs associated with it. No one wants more to divert people from the criminal justice system than a police officer.
And for those who are unfamiliar with the program that was asked about.
So just crisis intervention training, which is just giving us a full spectrum of tools and capabilities. Believe it or not, this is something we didn't teach in law enforcement for a real long time, right? I mean, we would try to hire for it, right? Some people they have naturally magnetic personalities, but not everybody does. Sometimes we have to teach people how to engage with other people and not become escalators of activity, escalators of force. So that's just something else. We're changing our use of force model in Marion. The Police Executive Research Forum has a model called Integrating Communications and Tactics, which is designed to integrate de-escalation into use of force models. It's something we're going to be working towards. Listen, we're serious about this business in Marion. We're not just working our way through it or feeling our way through it or making it up as we go along. We are on the leading edge of these kind of topics, and we're doing the best we can to push them through to the department.
Fantastic. Thank you. All right. So our next question is for the panel. Tonight's discussion has mentioned the severity of addiction in southwestern Virginia. Can the panel provide objective data, such as the number of overdoses, deaths, youth affected, arrests, incarcerations in Smith County?
I know the overdose rate at the Smith County Community Hospital Emergency Department was 1 per month of a death.
It's astounding. I practice as a nurse practitioner locally in rural health, and it is, there's some devastating statistics out there, and 1 a month is probably under. Would you not agree? Probably in Southwest Virginia. All right, so our next question deals with adolescents. So best practice for short-term medical detox for adolescents is a voluntary crisis stabilization unit. The person questions, we have no way to know how long kids will stay. What does evidence-based practice tell us? Thank you.
Evidence-based practice is keep them as long as you can. Really, there is no end point. The longer you can keep them, the better off it's going to be. I realize that's not a very specific answer, but yeah.
I think you all have shown that with addiction, not all of us fit in the same box, right? We're all unique, and that's how we should treat each other in our community. So this is another adolescent question. Outside of the family structure, what can we do to support our youth? How do we foster the confidence to say no to peer pressure, make smart goals, and be independent thinkers, giving them the tools needed to avoid substance abuse?
I love that question. A lot of it can be done through community programs, having places for kids to go after school, on weekends, when they have downtime where they're looking for something to do. Help them find something constructive to do instead of finding trouble. And that can be done by anyone. A lot of times we turn to schools and churches for those types of things, but really any organization can create a program for kids. And even if it's something as simple as, having a basketball court and a basketball available for a couple hours. And in terms of, instilling that confidence, I know it sounds strange, but sports can help a lot in helping kids get some of that confidence, and also just connecting with other people and having that sense of community that can help be a protective factor against substance use.
Thank you. We have a lot of questions on adolescents and pediatrics tonight. So,
I think minimizing the impact of social media, having some reasonable
Amen.
restraints on that is really important in adolescents and adults.
all right. So,
And may I
yeah,
keep
go
on
ahead.
going? Part of it, when you're talking about, I can imagine some people say, yeah, we need another bowling alley, we need another jumpy house, we need all these things. Part of it, you need to assess what we have already. And Some of you may giggle when I say this, but one of you is here who moved here from the Boone area because they wanted more things to do. All right, I have 2 new neighbors in my community who moved here for that. And you might giggle and you say, well, I don't know what we have that Boone doesn't have. We have the outdoors. If you take advantage of the outdoors and hiking and hunting and bicycling, man, we've got it. We've got it in spades. So part of it is assessing what you've got and developing a love for that.
And so one of the things that we've done, right, is we do the Fish with a Hero event. We take firefighters, we take police officers, we take kids out fishing. Businesses donate fishing poles. We teach them how to do it. We ultimately want to go from the lake to the pan and get them to engage, because in my humble, non-clinician opinion, kids need to be taught how to actualize achievement, right? They need to know how to have something that's their own. And so when you take a child fishing and they catch it, that they did that, and they start to actualize achievement, and those achievements build next. They want to do the next good thing for them. So I've taken all of my children hunting, and they've all been hunting. Not all of them have harvested a deer, but as soon as they do, the first thing I do is look at them and say, listen, you did that. I didn't do that. I brought you here. I mean, I gave you the conditions, but you did that. You own that. Doesn't have anything to do with me. You have done this. And when they start getting that feeling of success, that becomes intoxicating.
You all just knocked out 3 questions right there. All right. Success. So, next question I have is, how do we get the community to accept addicts so they don't feel alone?
Interaction, connection. One of the creative things that has been done recently, and Crystal Glass is one of the innovators who has come up with this, as well as Jenny Moore, who may be here too, is to tap into the resources at the Henderson. And they've started a meeting that's every Wednesday, or maybe every other Wednesday or something like that, where everyone is invited to come and paint and be creative. And if you're in recovery, welcome. If you're not in recovery, welcome. And then you're sitting beside people who, well, you don't know if they're in recovery or not, and it doesn't matter. We're just painting. We're connecting. But so connecting with people is really, I think, one of the first steps.
Humans integrating with humans and connecting with other humans.
Thank you. All right, our next question. John mentions substance-exposed infants and neonatal abstinence being the highest in Smith County. What are your thoughts on neurological impact and future of potential substance abuse and addiction, especially if they receive a pharmacologic intervention like morphine or methadone?
I think we're going to look at her for this.
Sure. I'm just trying to think where to start with that question. We know that yes, it absolutely does increase the risks of that child developing a substance use disorder. We know it increases the chances of them developing a lot of both physical and mental health issues. And again, I think, one of the biggest things we can do to support, children that are born with neonatal abstinence syndrome is just to be aware, to be educated, to know what kind of supports they may potentially need, and be prepared for that.
Thank you. All right, so this kind of touches on a few things that you all have talked about tonight, especially access to care. So what incentives is the community developing to encourage counselors to stay in our area?
wouldn't mind hiring one at some point. I'll be honest, I'd love a police officer with a counseling background, maybe even a combined office. You know, I've often said that if law enforcement didn't exist and somebody came to me and said, John, make a thing that does these things, it would look totally different. You know, unfortunately, we're locked into patterns of engagement now, but I would love to employ someone with a background like that.
I would tout the synergy and the collaboration that is evident in the fact that we're having this meeting today here. I think that is a selling point, and Stephanie will tell me if I'm mistaken, but when you were hiring Matt, I'm supposing that you probably said, hey, this is a robust environment where there's a lot of community involvement and support for recovery movement. And I think touting that, getting the word out about that, would foster people who say, I'm interested in that.
There aren't many places that have self-proclaimed groups that name themselves mountain movers. Yeah, we have groups all over Southwest Virginia called mountain movers, and so it's to attract or to help counselors stay in the area or not move out of the area or whatever. I would first of all say, maybe climb up to the top of Grayson Highlands. Pet it. You can't pet the ponies. I'm sorry. So don't pet the ponies. All right. But go check out the ponies. One comes up to you. I'm like, I'm not watching, right? Sorry, Chief.
Is there something more tangible? Does the Tobacco Commission offer some programs for that, for high need health services? I know there's things. I just don't know the answer to that.
Neil Hollyfield and some others, Gary Peacock, developed a fund where there's an incentive, and Dr. Fincher will have to kind of clarify this perhaps, but if you're an Emory professor and you choose to live in Smith County, there's an extra $5,000, $10,000 bonus that you get to incentivize people to live here. And that's a local initiative. Yeah. There's no tobacco company.
No. I was thinking
that's a small thing.
Those programs where certain health, if you go to medical school and you agree to work here for 10 years, you kind of get help with your student loans. Right. I thought those were administered by the Tobacco Commission. Maybe I'm wrong. But I thought there were programs like that, and maybe we have missed identifying something, right? Maybe we've been thinking too physical and not enough other directions. I'll have to look at that.
I'm going to sneak in on this one. So I work with Gary Peacock on the Smith County Pipeline. So it's for local students to go into a health professions career. And so to add on to that question, we're at Emory and Henry, we're really focusing on our local students as well, so we can get community students to come back to school for health professions. And one of the things that I love about that is I'm a first-generation high school graduate and a first-generation college graduate. And because of a camp that I went to at Emory and Henry when I was in the 7th grade, I thought I could go to college. So it's recognizing those students, those high school students, our community members that maybe have already graduated high school, that they can see their dream in health professions. And so someone that lives here is going to be more invested in our community as well. So that'll help add on to that question. So I think we have time for one more question. And so this deals with Beth Macy, since we've talked about Dope Sick and Raising Lazarus. Has the town of Marion considered the tent method, such as mentioned by the writer of Dope Sick, Beth Macy? I'm unfamiliar with the tent method, so.
You're going to have to break apart that.
That was a life-changing book for me,
yeah.
And I don't remember what the tent method is. So.
Okay.
What was the
Somebody
term?
open
I
that
didn't-
up.
I didn't
What's
hear.
the tent method?
Alexa, what was
Yes, we have.
method?
Yeah, I think that's a harm reduction kind of angle, right? Okay.
Yeah, that's definitely harm reduction.
Yeah. And I think we are doing that. Maybe just not necessarily knowing the acronym, but in several pieces, I think the town and the county are actively engaged, along with the Virginia Department of Health, actively engaged in all of it.
And I think that shows that we all have something to learn. And my final comments would be to the panel, just that we were very intentional about designing this panel to include a voice from the treatment perspective, a voice from the spiritual and legal, perspective and communities perspective, a voice from the scholarly academic perspective, and from law enforcement community leader perspective. So I hope you all grew and learned something from each other as much as the audience, and I know that I did. So thank you again, for all that you've done.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here.